self is not an anchor. It's an elastic that's tied around your waist. So let me explain very quickly. An elastic, the more that you pull it, let me show you. The more that you pull it, the tenser it gets. Those that are weak tend to break, and those that are a bit tougher are even harder to pull. However, when it comes to your past, there's two ways of looking at it. It's either an anchor, something that holds you down, and an excuse not to keep on growing, or it becomes an elastic or something that surrounds you and it's limiting you from stepping forward. Now, the one that is an anchor, something that we're very often taught, it's the baggage that we bring into new relationships or into new experiences. And that creates limitations, that creates boundaries and roadblocks. And it limits you from truly stepping into this new version of yourself. Now, there's two things of that. It's the fear of change and then the fear of leaving behind what you've been accustomed to. We're not going to get into that just yet. So the thing about this elastic, this beautiful elastic that's tied around our waist, is that we start understanding the limitations as we go on. So let's assume that we're tied with an elastic and we start walking. At first, nothing happens. We feel some resistance, but we don't really consider it. We keep on walking even more, and all of a sudden it gets more and more tense, and we feel a resistance. And we just want to break it, right? We want it to snap and just get out. But before we know it, we keep on creating more and more tension until it snaps. And that makes us, it may make us fall, it may take us into this idea of like, what the hell just happened? And you may be faced with another elastic in the future, right? Another tie that's around your waist because you didn't really understand what that limitation was. However, there's another response to that, which is you realize that there's a limitation, and instead of going forward, you stand still. And you're like, oh shit, like I know that there's a limit, I know that there's a boundary, but I'm too fucking scared to for it to break again. I don't want to fall again. I don't want to test that resistance. I'm comfortable here, or at least you convince yourself that you're comfortable. And this is where roadblocks and obstacles that you place on yourself start to occur. You start to realize that these limitations are based on this imaginary barrier that you created for no reason. And once you're there, it's like, okay, like there's an elastic. I'm not even going to question what's beyond it. You may dream, you may create expectations or illusions, but you never assume that they can be a reality because you know that there's that limit. However, take it a step further, right? Beyond those two responses that we get accustomed to, right? What if instead we're able to understand that this limitation, this elastic that is tied around our waist, is also something that we can get out of? It's something that is not necessarily part of us. Now, how do we do this? How do we separate ourselves from something that we created this illusion that it's an imaginary barrier? And that got me thinking, that got me questioning. It's so easy to think like, just get out of it, right? But no one really talks how hard it is to step into uncertainty and to change. And that limitation, that boundary that we create out of fear of either falling, failing, or the unknown or uncertainty, it limits us to take a chance on ourselves, on taking a chance on knowing that we can go beyond the limits that we've placed. And so once you realize that that elastic is not part of you, in this case, your past, it doesn't necessarily have to be such a burden. You're able to look at it now, see it from afar, but also know that it's there. After that awareness is created, you then have the option. Either you accept that it's there, you look at it, and you allow it to keep on having control over you, still talking about the past, or you make the decision of getting out of that boundary, of that limitation. And I mean, you can visualize yourself if you want, right? Visualize yourself tied to an elastic. You're standing inside that limitation. And just like you're sometimes skipping the line, you just either take a step over it, or when you're like a little kid, you go under it, right? You are able to get out of that limitation that you placed on yourself. But for that, it takes willpower and the courage to face that fear that you have on the uncertainty, on the unknown. And don't get me wrong, it can be hard, obviously, but is it harder than this familiar discomfort that we've been so accustomed to? Is it really more calming than the predictable suffering that we may encounter if we're constantly faced with the same patterns? I mean, don't get me wrong. I must admit that I guess I had pleasure in that suffering because it was known, right? I knew what was going to come out of it. But once I came to accept and realize that suffering is then again a choice that you make, because pain is inevitable, obviously, and well, the negative emotions that one feels is also inevitable. But the way that you react to that, that's a choice. And to make a choice on your own basis, that requires accountability. And that's something that requires trusting in the decisions that you're making and knowing that it is aligning with who you are. And so if you are ready to get out of that imaginary boundary that you have created around yourself, just start asking the questions that you are too scared to ask. And it's not about wanting to go back and dig the deepest of wounds and the details of certain experiences. I mean, I'm not a certified therapist, but I am someone who has faced that, and it's being able to see what is it now that is still being repeated from my past, or things that are still triggering me for some reason, and I don't know why. It is asking those questions, and if it goes back to a moment that you did not want to face, well, maybe it's time that you do. Because if you still want to be surrounded by that elastic, that's fine. I mean, keep on creating that tension within and keep on limiting yourself from not taking that step forward. And this elastic can be in different categories, right? It can go from relationships to friendships to career to finances to family to yourself, to how you see yourself, to how you love yourself, how you respect yourself. And it's going into each of these categories and taking the time and being patient with yourself to truly dig deep. And sometimes it is not only when you become aware of these triggers and limitations, but it's being able to interrupt the pattern when it's happening. And that means taking a different step that is not predictable. And that's the scary part. And it's also being able to reclaim your identity. It's also being able to be you. And with that, it comes asking those questions where you're able to rediscover yourself in the most beautiful way, and being patient with yourself and compassionate. And I guess with all of this, I'm going to leave you with a few questions so that you get to discover these parts of yourself. I'm going to leave some questions down below so that you can answer them. And if you're interested in these topics, give me a follow and go check my website. I have a bunch of articles related to this.